Just first of all, I should offer an apology. John Marsden would have liked to have been here, but he had another opportunity, which was to be going on a boat to Antarctica at the moment, and he felt compelled that that was actually, one of his bucket lists that he really needed to tick off. Secondly, just in terms of the project that we're undertaking, you won't actually see it. Many of you have probably picked up this book when you joined us today. You won't actually see it listed in here necessarily, and that's because we're a component of a much larger research project. So on page 7 of the book, there's a program called the National Demonstration Education and Engagement Program. It's a major research exercise. The value is nearly $10 million. We're one of 9 substreams involved in the project, and the project actually crosses over a range of initiatives and a range of skill set areas effectively. So there's a whole stream looking at technical issues around potable recycling. There's a whole stream that's focused effectively on social and economic issues around potable recycling, and a third stream that is really looking at developing what we're terming a national demonstration education and engagement program, which is a range of products and the like, and all of that is starting to be housed in a wiki at the moment, which I don't know if we got internet access and I can get access to it here. Actually, I probably don't. I didn't set it up before this morning, but I might be able to show you that to you later today if you're interested. So that's just a couple of things. First, the last thing I was going to say in terms of personal introduction, I've met many of you, but I look forward to talking with all of you across the course of today. In terms of background, I actually started this project on the first day that I joined Marsden Jacob Associates, which is 3 years ago, and we were putting the bid together for this. And the project itself has actually been running for 2 years, pretty much to the day at this stage. And it has about another 12 months to 18 months to go in terms of the development of the products that are happening across the rest of the project. We've nearly finished our component of the research. Before starting on this project and joining Marsden Jacob 3 years ago, I actually spent 10 years in government. I was an economist with New South Wales Treasury for a few years, and then I was an economist and manager with the Australian government, working with the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry on their water policy issues, and then afterwards with the Department of the Environment, as it's called nowadays. Not DOTE, I think you get in trouble if you call it that. So I used to work with them for several years, and I was working across urban and rural water policy programs and economic issues as well. So I bring something of a different background to this sort of study, which has been actually quite useful in terms of trying to understand how the governance decision processes actually work. This is a brief introduction to the project. So as I said, we're part of the National Demonstration Education and Engagement Project. And in particular, Marsden Jacob, we've been looking at governance, decision making and pricing related impediments as they relate to purified or potable water facilities. There's actually been considerable debate in the project about the use of terminology and what terminology we should actually be using, and is there value in consistent terminology. And it's been an interesting exercise because there seem to be several different terms that are used, and what has emerged from our research actually is that it's very regionally specific. And it's very relevant to actually think about what's the right terminology in the context of the audience that you're working with, and that audience is both stakeholder audience as well as customer audience. The research has shown that there's a great deal of interest in water recycling, but there's a lot of impediments that are making it very difficult to move from, look, this concept is sort of suitable in concept, but how do we actually turn it into a viable source solution, viable water source solution? The 3 key impediments that emerged again and again in the case study research that we've been doing are really a lack of familiarity with the technology. And this is important not only to the water service providers, but particularly important to decision makers. Decision makers just didn't understand the spectrum of technologies, and when they were confronted with it, they went, oh, well, we need to think about this. What does this mean as a health regulator? What are these technologies should we be looking at, and what are the health implications of it? Very unclear decision responsibilities under existing legislative arrangements. I'll talk about this a little bit more down the track, but there are gaps, basically, in the decision processes when you come to thinking about potable recycling. And some of the work, for instance, that Watercorp in WA really focused on was actually trying to map that process, address those gaps in the regulatory arrangements, clarify who has to make what decision when, and the like. And lastly, look, no surprise, highly politicised decision making that is really influenced by media and advocacy campaigns where these sort of projects are concerned. That's a really hard one. We've got some suggestions for what you can do about it, but frankly there's no real silver bullet on this. But I think there's a lot more that can be done, and it actually relates to establishing a longer term engagement strategy. What are our outcomes? We've got a much better appreciation of the importance of early and sustained engagement. It's also confirmed that pricing really isn't an impediment in itself, but if it's not considered at the outset, it can become a problem. And in a couple of situations that actually occurred where pricing emerged after facilities were developed or late in the process, and as Phil were talking about, who's going to pay for this? How do we actually get people to pay for this? And they realise, we've got a problem here. The research is actually combining, and this last point here is actually coming from discussions we've been having with industry about, are they finding this research useful? And the consistent feedback is yes. And the reason they're finding it useful is because it's helping them to justify what is so-called a slow burn governance and engagement project that helps to get all options on the table. It's not just about getting potable recycling on the table, it's having all options on the table so that we can actually look for the least cost alternative. By a slow burn, we're talking a process that is not linked to the political cycle. It's 5 years, it's 10-year type processes, and they're basically saying, as I think Don was saying earlier today and Greg, we're in a situation now, particularly on the east coast of Australia, where we've got plenty of water and we've got a great opportunity to actually start this process before the next emergency arises, and we can actually have planning in place, we can have the decision processes established, we can understand what needs to be done, and we can have done a lot of the thinking before it. Our deliverables from this, we've done 3 case studies. These are going to be published on the wiki when that all goes live. These deliverables aren't yet fully finalised. The case studies were on the Western Corridor scheme, which everyone probably has heard about, groundwater replenishment in Perth, and water purification in the ACT. And we're currently developing our final product, which is a bit of a guidance paper on governance and engagement. But really what it goes to is helping set the evidence base for organisations that are thinking about potable recycling and want to engage with their decision makers and want to engage early. How do they convince them that early engagement is actually a really good thing? I've got a link to the wiki here, but it's not going to work because I didn't set it up beforehand. Apologies. Key results from this project. Well, what's emerged is simple objective across all is we've got a select portfolio of water assets. At a very simple level, we're looking at level of service, reliability, quality, and that sort of thing. It's a very linear planning model. Where we're moving forward is the more complex objective, which is looking at an integrated set of or portfolio of sources and actually thinking about what triggers actually then lead to what source that you actually bring online. And another way of picturing that is actually in terms of what's the nature of your issue? Is it a short-term issue and you need an insurance solution? Or is it a lasting issue and you need a lasting solution for it? And I think what planning is doing is becoming more sophisticated in this space and starting to realise that actually, you need to be thinking about the nature of your problem and the solution and tailoring it accordingly and looking to keep all options on the table as a means of keeping the cost down. And that's the cost down both in terms of the cost to the Treasury and the Crown asset, but also the cost in terms of consumers and the price that they actually pay for the water that they're getting. So why isn't it on the table? Look, as I said before, familiarity, unclear decisions and politicised arrangements are an issue. Another key driver in this is actually the climate signal. And what we can see basically in Perth, which is the chart on the left, is quite a clear climate signal. This is annual inflows into their surface water storages. It's a constant pattern. They've had to do something about it, and this culminated basically in the announcement that they've got 2 desal plants, and the next thing they're going to do is develop groundwater replenishment, which is effectively water recycling. if we look at what's happened in southeast Queensland, this is inflows to Wivenhoe. It's far more inconsistent. The pattern isn't as clear. The climate signal can make, as such, can make it quite challenging in terms of thinking about how we bring sources online. Key results from our research, again continued. This is effectively mapping a typical investment planning and decision process. And if we look at our traditional sources, pre-feasibility, source development planning, feasibility approvals, construction, it's a process, we know how to do it, we follow it through. What emerged from potable recycling is that it's not that process doesn't exist and there's a missing step, because this is novel technology, it's new technology, it has new risks that come with it and new considerations that need to come with it. And so time needs to be actually spent thinking about mapping, developing and really understanding the approvals process as you work your way through. So that's where this sort of green square is concerned, basically saying there's a new step very early in the process. How do we get these arrangements in place? How do we get more favourable institutional and decision-making arrangements in place? Now, I'm not going to say that this is going to fix the problem for everything and we'll have potable recycling everywhere. But what we found basically, and learning from what's happened in WA in particular, but also internationally, is that if the industry embarks on a process of a longer-term discussion and engagement program around potable recycling that is staged, that actually does the pre-feasibility work, and thinks about, is this economically viable? Should we have this on the table? Then if it is a viable source alternative, then it actually steps into, have we actually got the preconditions from an approvals process in place? Do we all understand the technology? Is there a clear and transparent allocation of decision responsibility? And then if that can be developed and put in place, well, how do we then get this into the source development plans? Critically, the research has shown that it's not critical to have supportive institutional arrangements at the outset. You can actually, over a long-term engagement process, get these arrangements in place. As I said before, the opportunity, we can get all options on the table. The timing is actually right from the discussions I've been having with industry, because we're not water constrained, as others have said earlier. Capital cities across the East Coast are 80-90% in terms of their water security and storages in dams. Perth's the only one who's really below that, and Darwin, with a very small storage, I think is sitting at about 60% at the moment. So there's a real opportunity at this point in time. How did they do it in Perth? This timeline is really interesting on a couple of fronts, I believe. One, in terms of the length of it. Potable recycling in the context of groundwater replenishment, so that's what they're looking at in Perth, is groundwater replenishment. One of the key reasons they're looking at that is because there's what they term a long naturalisation period, so that goes in there and then it stays underground for a considerable period of time before it's extracted. So that's an advantage that they've got in Perth that we may not have necessarily everywhere else, or we definitely don't have everywhere else. The other is that they've actually got surplus capacity in their infrastructure to extract groundwater. And if they can be putting more in, they can actually be exploiting that infrastructure more effectively. But it first appeared in the planning documents, in public planning documents in 1995, this concept. They basically said, look, this is a great idea, it's in, but we need to think more about it. And then over the course of the next 10, 15 years, they basically evolved the concept, did the research into the concept, established groups across government where they started talking about it, got their regulator, both the health, economic, environmental regulators, to really understand the technology options and the implications of those technology options. And all of that culminated actually in about 2010, or 2008 firstly, when they got the state water recycling strategy, which said, we're going to do this as a demonstration plan. We're going to give it a go and we're going to see what happens. And then in 2010 they built it and they ran it for 2 years and ran a series of tests on it. And the project was so successful that they've recently launched and basically said, it's approved, it's our next source. We're going to be developing it when we need to, and at this stage we're looking at about 2015 for when that will occur. So the value of a really long-term process is really important in this. The other message out of this though is if they had have thought about this linearly and said, oh no, we've got this availability in our storages or in our extraction resources for our groundwater infrastructure, we should do it now, it would have been really challenging. And they needed to have the backup plans of the desal plants, so that because they couldn't get the approvals in place, they could actually readily jump to other source options and not find themselves in a situation where they would have serious water restrictions in Perth. There are a range of audiences for this, very similar to the list that Phil has just shown. I don't think I need to run through them, but I think pretty obvious. The adoption plan for this is again very similar. We're currently working on this last product, which is sort of a long-term engagement decision-making project guidance paper, effectively, but what it does is it draws the evidence from the case studies together and basically helps create the case to help the various audiences to start that conversation and start it now while the opportunity actually presents. We've been doing a deal of promotion of it and discussions with water service providers, planning agencies, etc. Again, public presentations like this, Ozwater, etc. And we've actually been working very actively with a number of the industry reference group members for this project, so very grateful for actually their input to the project. Look, there's a long list of acknowledgements on this project. We've interviewed an enormous number of people. We're indebted to advice from the Project Advisory Committee, the reference group, the University of New South Wales, who's been leading the project. But as you can see, there's been an enormous number of participants involved in the case study research that we've been doing, and they've very generously donated their time to the project. So, look, as I said before, what we're outlining is basically and recommending is that there's an opportunity for a longer term perspective to be taken on these issues and for the dialogue to commence around it. And by doing that, you can actually start establishing and understanding the approval processes, the decision processes, who needs to be involved, what questions need to be answered for them, what they need to understand, how you can actually get that information to them in a timely way. And that can actually help simplify and facilitate the inclusion of potable recycling in source development planning moving forward. We're not advocating, I don't think, that you actually go to a massive development immediately. There's other parts in the paper where we actually talk about and say, look, realistically, there's value in starting small with this technology. It's new technology, helps people get used to it, understand it, see the understanding opportunity, and that's effectively what they're doing in Perth and what they've done overseas. Demonstration, pilot, build it a bit bigger, and then it actually becomes understood and it's part of the source schedule. Thank you very much.